So again, for those of you that don't know me, I'm Ron. I'm part of the NixOS Foundation, and I also run Flox. And I don't know if Kelsey needs an intro. Kelsey is Kelsey. He's done a lot of cool stuff, and we'll talk about those cool things as we go through it. I think just to kick off, right? I think one of the things that's been top of mind for me, and I'm assuming it's top of mind for a lot of folks here in this room, is what is actually happening right now, right? For software engineering, the SDLC, like what is that ecosystem? What is it today? And do we have any thoughts about where it's going? Because I think that's going to lead us to talk about Nix and Nix's place in all of it. And before I turn that question to you, I actually have a question for y'all. How many folks here have written a line of code this week? No. Like written a line of code. You went in there into an IDE or wherever you're writing your code. Yeah. Good for you. How many folks here wrote a line of code in the last year? Look around, right? Things are changing, right? Like the way that we build software and create products in the ecosystem and create value in the ecosystem is changing very, very aggressively, right? We have our friends from Anthropic sitting around here that are part of that reason. But I think going back to the question, like, what are you seeing?
Look, I'm going to be honest. I am an AI skeptic. And it could be because I spent all this time learning this craft, going through the experience part of this craft. It's not just learning how to write code or learning how to write SQL or debugging network packets. It's literally the experience that goes into trying to build things and having this context. So for me, I've always been in the train your own model. I think it's okay for humans to know how to do stuff. And then also remind myself that we train the machines where you think the data set comes from. So I'm very biased in that regard. Now, I do think a lot of people wish software would go in a certain direction. I think a lot of people wish that software development will go into a certain direction. And so
what directions are you seeing?
So think about
what are they wishing for?
Today, you have agency. Most of the languages we use, most of the runtimes we use, most of the operating systems we use, you can just go download them and build whatever you want. But you have to have the skill. And that's a big bar of entry for a lot of people. Some people just don't have the skill. So if you don't have the skill, you almost can't build anything. Sure, there's some drag and drop. What you see is what you get editors out there. But for most people, the skill is a big barrier to entry. If we think that we're going to make everybody go back and learn the same things we learned 20 years ago and go through the same path, some people might consider that gatekeeping. If you're now given a tool where you can express what you want and it spits out something very similar that someone with 20 years of experience could do, you're going to be excited about that. So for that next generation of software developers, my daughter's speaking at this conference. It's her first real conference talk for the first time. She's 18. But she uses these tools. And as much as I want to romanticize about the idea of like, no. You need to scour the web. You need to copy and paste from Stack Overflow. You need to see your machine segfault and restart on you. As much as I want that to occur, it ain't realistic. The search results are pretty terrible these days. And there are things that you can do now. It feels like a superpower. So who am I to tell her that's not a great way to learn? And so for her, I can imagine why she would want the world to go this way. And every once in a while, I'll download one of these tools and just see what the flow looks like. And there's no denying I can't remember the entire standard library. And then when I do visit the docs for the standard library, there are no examples. I don't know why in 2026 we still believe that humans don't need examples on how to use things like functions or what the system calls actually do. And so in that case, what do? All y'all, I think, if you're being honest, you used to go to Stack Overflow too, right? All along you copy and paste, so you were kind of doing some of the similar things that we accuse these tools of doing. But when I use those tools, the inner loop is much tighter. When I ask for an example, a similar quality thing comes out. Last year, I was even more skeptical. This year, I'm watching that thing try to compile it first, look at the errors on its own, go back and regenerate the code until it at least builds. For a lot of people, that is a huge boost. The thing that scares me, though, is if we did this for 10 years in a row, how many people actually know how to actually write code? I know a lot of developers that can't write a SQL query. Full-time enterprise developers, if they don't have an ORM, they can't write a SQL query. Left join, woo, we're asking for too much. Select star from all the tables and just filter the data in the programming language of your choice. And so for some reason, I just don't want that to happen. And so that's the way I think I see it now. There's two branches.
Why though? Right? Why? Because
I love the profession. I love the craft. I'm not here to sell you the tools.
So what you're saying is that there's going to be a software engineer. There's going to be the artists.
No. There's no guarantee there's going to have to be anything. That's the hard truth. If you all believe that it's just going to be there because we want it, that's not how it goes. A lot of us don't own these companies. A lot of us are employees at these companies. You're given RSUs that you probably sell pretty close to immediate because it's deferred comp. A lot of us aren't that invested in this. And there are pressures, right? I'm watching people say, hey, I'm anti-AI, until you see the layoffs. Changes your tune real quick if you need that job. So I think the reality is the tools of the trade will dictate what the hiring process looks like. I'm pretty sure someone somewhere is like, I don't believe in typewriters. It's going to be real hard to get a job today if you don't believe in mechanical keyboards. It's not going to work. The team will look at you crazy, like, what do you mean you don't believe in email and sending electronic messages? That will change. It probably will. And where the inertia is right now, a lot of people are trying their very best to make that happen. So we got to be honest about it. And if those tools are actually any good, would you not use them? Who uses a compiler here? Okay, there was an argument, if you look back in the archives 30 years ago, compilers are for people that don't know how to write code. What are you using a compiler for? You're going to let the compiler decide what instruction sets you use? People are still arguing about garbage collection.
Yeah,
Garbage collection is still
a sensitive topic, but I think we made some progress there.
Garbage collection? Nah, real people manage their own memory. Buffer overflows and all. So the way I think about it right now, that's what we're faced with, the reality of it. So I think a lot of people here are practitioners. You're at a Nix conference, Flox conference. You are probably in the fringe part of the technology where you know what's going on. You've turned that knowing what's going on to leverage. And also, I would really hope that people who are in charge of the core layers of our infrastructure actually know what's going on. So I'm not surprised that people in this community need to know how software is actually built. We need to know how software can be exploited, and we need to understand how these toolchains go together. So I think this group is very special in that regard. But if you all zoom out a little bit, that's not the norm. A lot of people can care less where the software comes from. Apt-get install the internet until this thing works. Not sure who packaged it. I don't even look at the author's name. I don't look at the checksums. If it works, it works. That's the reality. And one thing you and I were talking about was, do you need package management in this day and age? And you all would say, Kelsey, of course, this is a silly question. But have you seen people use some of these tools? Give me a thing that does X. And I don't honestly see these things go out and go find the right library. Sometimes it just generates the snippet. You remember the left pad debate? Should you use things like left pad when you can just write a 3-line function instead of taking a third-party dependency? Well, every prompt is having that same discussion, except for the developer isn't really making that decision anymore. So what happens to all this package management work that we're doing underneath the hood? Do we become the guardrails? Or do we get replaced by people creating software for themselves and not sharing it back?
Yeah, and I think what I've been seeing is that it's becoming almost a prerequisite, right? Because I think another aspect here that's creating an impact on what we view as software engineering is almost the competitive landscape, right? Like what allows you to be more successful? There's a bunch of different things. I think in the past it was very obvious, like what were your moats? What was your defensibility? A lot of it was IP. A lot of it was the code that I generated. And the more I'm talking to folks, I think that wall has started to kind of crumble. And to your earlier point,
I challenge this. You know why?
Yeah.
Because I've worked in small teams where I liked all the people. I was trustworthy of them. I knew that if we gave a person a task, that they could knock that task out, and if they couldn't, they would ask questions. And we wouldn't shame them because we knew that they would be able to do the best of their ability, and they were professionals.
Yeah.
And so we helped them when we could. I love working in those teams. But I've also worked in large enterprises where it literally is a real-time Game of Thrones. You don't understand why decisions are being made. You're like, wow, this is a silly decision. Who made this decision? Oh, the person that knows the least with the highest title made the decision for us, and we just had to implement it. And that feels terrible. And so that loop has been some people's inner loop for the last decade or so. You get the JIRA ticket. I'm not sure why a customer would want to do that. Customers are always right. Copy, paste, Stack Overflow. Pull request. 2 lines, we can talk about it for a year. 300 lines, it looks good to me. Merge,
You sure?
and repeat. And so I think if you come from that world, maybe some of this tooling looks like it allows you to automate some of the most tedious parts of that workflow. The things that I like from this is like you have to write a doc about what you actually want. Give me an example. And people's like, oh, I won't give examples to humans, but the AI agent needs examples. I will write all the markdown in the world. It's like, Ben, we've been trying to get you to write docs for like a decade. But I didn't know if you were going to read them. Now you have to write the docs and the specs if you want this thing to do anything.
I mean, who's choosing what goes underneath our request? Like who's actually
You know this is
making
fashion,
the
right?
choice?
So let's get back to humanity. You know, a lot of us are just cargo culting what we see,
Right.
right? Somebody does something. You go to a conference, you're like, wow, I remember seeing someone use Vim for the first time. I'm like, damn, hey, I have a question. What Vim plugin is that? It's like, dude, what? I talked about curing cancer. I was like, I know. But I want to know what Vim plugin was that. Your workflow is amazing. And so a lot of times, that's how this stuff spreads. That's the real leadership component. The people who get things done, we want to see how are you getting things done. Like when you all talk about Nix to other people, that could be a weird thing to talk about Nix to other people. But when you do, there's some value that you're putting out there. You're telling the story, right? You're saying, hey, ever since I started using Nix, my life got better in some way. And if I hear that story and I trust you.
You lost weight, hair grew back.
Yeah, well, none of that worked for me. But then those become the things that make another engineer say, I might give this Nix thing a try, because if that stuff is true for you, then maybe it'll be true for me.
Right, and I think that's a good segue into, right, so the industry, right, we're talking about that right now. Everything is kind of in the air. We're changing our workflows. I think folks are renaming software engineering. Have you seen that? Like there's context engineer. I think Mitchell had a really smart thing around like harness engineering. If you look,
someone that went from being a system administrator to a DevOps engineer to an SRE and to a platform engineer, like I get it. That's what we do.
Yeah, and I think I'm seeing a lot of folks that have not gone through that yet. Right? There's like the first time they're like, wait, I'm a software engineer. How am I not going to be a software engineer tomorrow? But I think that's a good segue to start talking about like where does it meet us in the Nix ecosystem, right? Like is there something here that is uniquely positioned with Nix? I'm asking you as an outsider. Obviously, as
an outsider, the thing I've always wondered was at some point when does RPM, Debian, Gentoo go away? The package managers. Why would it go away? And when I was at Puppet Labs, I remember we started building our own package manager. The first time that I built a package manager, and I learned about the dependency diamond problem. This is like an intractable thing. Yeah. It's not easy to solve. And I decided to say, YOLO, let's just use Ruby gems as the baseline for it, and that causes all kind of problems because you can have side effects and things can execute underneath the hood. But we built a package manager when there was already like 18 other package managers. I don't know why people do this, like I write a passage. And every language comes out with its own way of thinking about managing packages to some degree. At what point do we get to where people say, hey, maybe Nix becomes a universal way to talk about the relationships between software and how we consume them, whether dynamic loaded or fetch and retrieve or use as composition for something else. We know it has those capabilities,
right.
But I don't know if people are thinking of it that way because it could become the universal package manager, and that's the vision that you all would have to put out there.
Right.
And then the other one should be able to go away, and me and you talked about this earlier, was if Nix became the universal package manager and relationship tree of all software, then if you're Debian, you would go to that tree and say, we want this collection of packages to represent our distro. Right? You could put them back in Debs if you really wanted to distribute them that way, no different than you put in that in a Docker container to have your container run with a subset of this Nix tree. That could be a vision that you all put out there, and then the work becomes you convincing all the existing people repackaging the exact same software to stop. Join this one effort, and we'll build something that becomes an industry standard where there's one repository where we put all our effort, and then everyone's free to pick and choose from that lake of software as a distribution target or repackaging to your own distro of choice. That could be one outcome, but you're gonna all have to get together and have a unified set of discussions and be very convincing.
Which is what we're planning to do in these 2 days, right? So the way that I've been looking at it, and I've been talking to folks inside of Nix, outside of Nix, is I think the more I'm seeing where the industry is going is that I would love for it to be a fact, right? So to your point about the vision for Nix in the modern SDLC, is that Nix can be the pure way that we actually are able to derive the packages and the baseline infra for what we're building, regardless if it's led by a human, by an agent, by a model, it doesn't matter, right? So when you need something to be reproducible and you care about the speed, the infrastructure, the security, the underlying factors of it, I think Nix is uniquely positioned to be that platform, right? And again, folks in this room kind of understand the underlying tech for it and why it's uniquely positioned, but I think that's, when you want to be pure, there's Nix. And I think it's also fine to tell the industry that it's fine to be impure, right? Like, if you want to just vibe code an app, that you don't care if you throw it away, right? Like, there is still a reason to use paper plates. It's bad for the environment. You shouldn't do it. But, when you're tired at the end of the day and you have like 4 people over and the last thing you want to do is dishes, throw the paper plates on there and then throw them in the trash. It's totally fine.
But at what point do the LLMs contribute back? Right, so right now we have this one direction that get trained, they help people retrieve things from its trainer or generate things from its world model that it's developed on its own. So we know what that direction looks like. When does your LLM stop and say, hey, wait a minute, this is the millionth time we're doing this implementation of a thing. When does it say, stop, let me create an interface for this, package it, generate it in every programming language, and contribute it back as a reusable, if you will, cached version of this logic. We call them libraries. And you take that library and you say, going forward, when anyone wants this piece of logic, I will just add the import statement versus generating the same code again. The problem with that is, how do you get a function signature that everyone will be happy with? Right, this is that hard part, right? If you create a function signature, maybe 80% of the people like it, and then do you create another thing that has a different signature with slightly different behavior? Right. To me, that's another route that this goes, where people start, right now I think most people that are getting into this, they can probably care less if it came from a library or the LLM generated it, and they think about the world a little differently. The LLM in their world is the runtime. This intermediate thing is just a temporary thing. That's just how it works today. There is a world where you go back to maybe that small talk way of thinking. You're just in this inner loop the whole time. And you're saying that this thing could be anything, and you're just trying to limit the outcomes, the inputs and the outputs of it. And in that world, what is a library? What's a library? So that is another way that this goes. There's a world that it goes that way, and then people say, all of this package management stuff you all did, we don't need it anymore. Could be a mistake. I think it would be a mistake, but that never prevented people from trying anyway.
Yeah, I think I saw a Twitter post by someone recently who was like, why do I need package managers? I can just have, the models are going to get better, they're going to get cheaper, maybe I'll run something locally and it'll just generate everything it needs.
What was your answer?
I think my answer was that as an ecosystem, right, there's a resource allocation question. It's like a physical question where if we can reuse, we should reuse. Now, I don't know if we're going to change physics. I mean, we have some Anthropic folks here. We might want to ask them. But so if we're changing physics, let us know, because that would change the entire conversation. But if we're not, I think reusing is going to still be the baseline principle of how we think about things and how we optimize and make them better. So my personal opinion, obviously I'm biased drinking from the Nix Kool-Aid, is Nix is uniquely positioned to be that reuse platform, right? So if the models are generating the same piece of code 5 times over, that model can very easily use a Nix framework to go and make that piece of code into your, your mention of the library. And then I can reuse it. Maybe I can reuse it locally. Maybe I can, the models become open source contributors as well. I mean, who knows Ryan TM here? The biggest contributor to Nix. Who knows Ryan TM? Is Ryan TM a robot or a human? It's a bot. Pre-AI days. So I think I'm totally with you on this, and I think Nix is very uniquely positioned to do it.
How many people actually make Nick packages here? Anyone ever, you maintain them? Do you make examples on how to use the packages? You make examples. Like
only that person is saying yes.
Who else is saying yes? Who else writes examples? Like, I think 3 of y'all do. One of y'all are lying. So the thing about reusability, and I honestly believe this now, first of all, we have a discoverable problem.
Yeah.
I don't know what half of these packages actually do. Like, imagine someone new to computers, like, what does FFmpeg do? It does everything. What does Emacs do? Everything. But you could never tell from the name alone. So, right, you go to the next level. You got this man page. Like, what is a man page? And it's like all of these things except for how to use it. There's lots of reference docs except for how to use it. And then how not to use it. Good luck. Go find a blog post. There's a hand up.
Yeah, question. So along the lines of the previous conversation, what do you guys think about Elon's statement about the LLM will generate the actual executable, skip the whole bang?
Well, like we can't.
So
We can't even acknowledge that person. I'm joking.
So someone from the crowd asked about some not well-known person's statement of being able to just skip the entire thing, and the models are just gonna build and deploy the executable. Yeah.
Honestly, at this pace, they probably should, if we're being honest. Like, you use a compiler. You skipped a lot of things you're supposed to be doing. Like, when I ran Go build for the first time, that whole linker step, that preprocessor step, I don't know about that step. The assembly that comes out of it, you don't know about that assembly. Most people don't. And the most people that are qualified to even look at it, sometimes they don't even know what they're looking at. And I remember there was a commit from a guy named Russ Cox into the assembly part of Golang. They don't use libc. They have some of their own implementations straight to the kernel. Like, we're not going to depend on libc for historical reasons. We want no part of that. And so they implemented some of these system calls themselves. And I remember looking at one of the files. It was a bit of assembly. And it's like, this looks crazy, but don't touch it because it works better this way. Right? So all the people with skill be like, oh, no, this is not how you do that. It's like, it is. Something computers, that's how they work. So most people, I don't know if they even know how to operate at that level. So the thing that I'm seeing from this user experience of an LLM, like when people interact with data, find the tallest person in my customer base. And then it goes out and says, it's this person. Now, the Oracle people is like, oh, that's easy. Select from customers where, decrypt PI data, cross-reference to the license database, find the thing that's not called height in the column table. It's called person measurable abbreviated -x. If you know that, then you know that that's the column, and it's in metric. Yeah. And if you know that, then you know to use a conversion to make it inches, and you will get your answer. And it's only 3 pages of SQL. And you're like, oh, man, like, I don't know if I want to learn that. And so I get this new tool, and it says, you can just ask the question, and somehow it returns the answer. So think about software in practice. You can pick Golang today. You can pick Java today. You can pick Python today. There's lots of ways for you to try to articulate your intent and then have a runtime or compiler turn that intent to something the computer will actually do. And I don't want my Python to be translated to Perl first. Doesn't make any sense. We can skip that. Go straight to the thing that the computer will need or whatever Python needs to do its thing. So over time, either A, why wouldn't we create either a dedicated programming language that works well for the new interface. And we've done that over time, right? Remember when the web takes off, we get Ruby on Rails. When the cloud takes off, Golang comes out and finds its perfect fitting, and the standard library tends to match. I will not be surprised if someone somewhere is saying, why do we need this intermediate representation if we don't expect people to use it? Not saying it's going to work, I'm just saying if we got Haskell, more than likely we're going to get something that's going to be something more friendly to what agents do versus what we do.
I was reading, so this whole discussion, unlike us sitting here last year, which felt so different to me, it feels like 10 years ago. I was reading, it kind of went back, and I wanted to start reading about like initial literature around software. So I started reading some theses from like 92, 97, and one of the ways that one of these PhD candidates explained software in general, and I think it relates to potentially some of your question topic, was all software is our attempt to do two things. One, communicate with a non-organic brain, right? It's just like we have this brick, it's a rock, and it can do things. And we want a better way of telling it the things that it can help us, so it does the things that can help us. And the second thing that he said that I think really struck with me around software is all software is our attempt to make sure that some form of a similar input, magic happens, and some form of a similar output comes out of that. So I know that, you know, when I turn the light switch, hopefully 98% of the time it turns on the lights and doesn't like blow up my microwave. And I think that is, right, the paradigm that we're looking at now, because I think for most of the industry, they just want to be able to click a button and for that button to somewhat deterministically, reproducibly provide the output that they're expecting.
You know, a good example to think about is when certain software functions move into the hardware. Like, remember when SSL was a very expensive thing to do, and then it became something that was just embedded either in your network card or the CPU or some coprocessor. And over time, as things get more efficient or we get asyncs instead of general computing, you start to see that things are just worth doing, that you collapse the abstractions down, and then those libraries are like, hey, we don't need to implement this in user space anymore. They're now in the hardware. They speed up, they're more predictable, maybe there's more consistency across different platforms and operating systems. That, I think, will continue, but there's also a question I think that's worth asking, so I always have to try to suspend my AI skepticism. If there was a better way to write software, should we pursue it? That's still worth asking, because I think sometimes we get stuck in what we know. This is how we've written software, this is how we're gonna always write software. And then someone somewhere else is saying, if there was a better way to do it, would you? Right? Do these things not just become functions in the hardware? Do they not become part of some maybe more rigorous standard library? Why are we still trying to figure out how to log in a user? I can't believe the number of developers that are still trying to figure out how to log someone into a website and make sure that they only do specific things that that user can do. Why does that take up so much energy? That's a known thing at this point, I believe. Maybe we can find a better method, but I don't think people should be struggling with SAML in 2035.
So, by the way, feel free to raise your hand. I think you raised your hand earlier.
Audience questions, my favorite part.
You mentioned a couple times kind of on the download of the AI skepticism. Someone with your experience and perspective, where does that come from and why?
So question 2, Kelsey, is, you know, you mentioned AI skepticism a few times. Someone like you, where does that come from? Why?
It's the motivations behind the technology. Right, some people were trying to compare AI to like a destructive weapon. Well, a weapon of mass destruction is for one purpose, to destroy things. I look at AI as a little different. You have a bit of agency and choice on how we get to use it. And so when I started my career, I was coming in 1999. You could go to like a computer store, CompUSA, get a magazine, and there was like free software in the back of it. And I felt like, wow, just in time. I didn't have to learn Solaris. I didn't have to pay IBM for an AIX license. Some of you are still paying IBM for an AIX license. That's okay. But I just got this software, and I remember the first distribution, it was like the Beastie logo from FreeBSD. I was like, oh, that is a cool logo. And then I just learned FreeBSD at home. And then there was a community of people that were just really excited about me learning FreeBSD. And I was like, that's the world I came from. So operating system could have stayed proprietary. But then this community showed up and says, hey, what if everyone had the ability to do this? not just the raw tech, not just the raw skills, but even just teaching people how to do it. The skepticism around the AI piece for me is, it's one of the first, maybe crypto was there too. Well, crypto had a community. I was just not really a fan. But AI feels like we're skipping the community part fast. Almost as if people don't even care. For example, when I talk about the relationship, or I see the relationship play out, I've been an open source maintainer, had a little project called CompD, and I remember waking up on Saturday and someone's like, I work at a company that makes billions of dollars, and I would like you to implement this feature for free on the weekend. I'm like, nah, that's not happening, right? I know the burden of that. And so to see someone say, hey, I got this tool that allows me to generate software real fast, and all my only goal is to rise up to the leaderboard of top contributor, you need to review this like, hey man, I can't keep up. I didn't start this project to just add a bunch of features. I started this project to reflect some of my own needs and then to share with the rest of the community. The fact that you can go fast is not the number one concern I have. And so when I watch people talk about this technology, all I'm hearing so far is productivity increases. Then I ask questions like, so you spend more time with your family now? Like, no, Kelsey, that's not what's happening. Are they giving y'all raises? Nah, we're not getting raises either. I'm like, so where's the productivity going? And that's the part that I'm skeptical about. If someone said, hey, Kelsey, our goal with this AI is to make food free, right? We're going to create enough robots so food is now free. Not that we're anti-capitalist, it's that we want to take the profits and spread them out across society. Then you would see me doing 1,000 AI demos because I would feel that the community is aligned. But right now what I'm seeing is we're going to make a robot that you can buy on a subscription service. So if you thought being able to roll down your windows in your car was cool, wait until we put a subscription behind it. That's not exciting to me. So my skepticism isn't, can cloud code really generate code? That's not the most exciting thing to me. It's that do the people that control the biggest part of it, what are their motivations? Like I got a letter in the mail, hey, you're part of a class action lawsuit, nothing against Anthropic. But hey, they took your Kubernetes up and running, the book that you labored over, they just took it. And they used it to train their model, and some answers you get from talking about Kubernetes comes from your work, and they just took it. I'm like, really? You can just take it? Yeah, you can just take it. And they've agreed to pay you this much as a consequence. Like I wasn't part of the agreement. It's like, yeah, I know, the lawyers were, they'll take 80% of it, and the rest of you 100 million will split the other 20%. Fair deal with me, all you gotta do is click here, and if you don't click here and fly and print, you'll never win anything anyway, so you might as well click. That's where my skepticism comes from. Now, I don't want to dismount or disregard the open source work, so I'm happy again. I'm seeing that open source people say, hey, we can have open weights, we can have open bias, we can have people that know what we're doing, and we can choose to work on our own terms, we can choose to have this stuff run on your own machine, we can make our own IDEs. I'm like, yeah, we're back. That's the world I want to see. So I'm not going to throw in the towel here, but my skepticism is that I want to see them get funding too. I want to see us use their models, and I want to see them get stage time as well, because I think that's going to be the thing that keeps the playing field even going forward.
Yeah. So, free. Yeah. No, I think I wanted to go a bit more into Nix with perfect.
Okay, my question, this is more about the, let's say Nix to become the de facto package manager. How do you reckon with, I've been using Nix now for work for the last couple months. Nothing's on fire. Because the rest of the community is putting tremendous amount of effort into making it not on fire. I like the field of dreams mentality of software where it's like, they'll come, it's such an attractive proposition. Right now, the marginal gain seems really small, given how much work everyone's doing. For us, being Nix, to succeed, it feels like you have to dismantle others, right, to raise that margin, and I'm having a difficult time wanting to do that, right? Like, it feels wrong to say, Nix is good, but you have to tear down everything we've done, right? And without that, though, it's actually not that, if I'm honest, like, Fedora, Debian, they put so much work to making it 80%, and Nix is 85. I don't know. You guys can argue about that. So how do we do that as a community? How do we make it
Yeah.
The goal isn't to attack, it's to inspire.
Right.
Those are different things.
So just so folks know, the general question is that I'll also provide some unneeded context on Fareed. He's kind of like our Trojan horse to a bunch of places. We kind of send him to all these firms, and he brings in Nix, and and then I learned how he did it. But he was asking about, he's a new place, right? He's a new place. He's trying to bring Nix in. Fareed is a damn expert. I would definitely hunt him down and ask him questions about bringing Nix into the workplace. But it feels like the conversation now, because so much work is going into just how things operate right now, right? That it's kind of like at the 80%. And yeah, you don't have to put that much effort and get Nix, but Nix is only like 85 or 90. So it's almost like you have to tear things down to show them how much work is happening, and then without all that work, you can get Nix for free, but without it, it feels like a marginal difference, and folks are not convinced. And I think Fareed is saying that he doesn't want to go out there and like tear things down or be on the offense against something else that exists.
Great.
If a new medical treatment comes out and it gets better results for real people, then the number one thing you do is educate and prove it. And if it is better and someone says, nope, I'd rather stick with the one that doesn't work, that's tragic, but our job is to show and prove that it does work. So when I think about, like when Kubernetes came out, I remember someone was like, we're going to kill Mesos. I was like, and this was in public, I was like, what is there to kill? We're inspired by the Mesos paper. We were inspired by those things. We looked at what they were able to achieve with distributed systems. They kind of opened up the door. We think there's a better way of thinking about it, thanks to these new tools underneath. So we are taking distributed systems and making them friendly. And so when you go to the Mesos conference and you say, hey, I'm going to show you all the difference between Mesos and Kubernetes, not to tear them down. Mesos is amazing for these reasons. You have the scalability, the two-part scheduler. Kubernetes has these things. And the people in the Mesos community look at this and say, I see what you're doing there. We're going to take the CNI, the container network interface, we're going to bring that in. Maybe we can add Docker support over here. Now, maybe we don't believe that your API is right. We like ours. But you're right about these two things. We've been inspired by that. And then when they come, don't say things like they stole that idea from, like what is there to steal? You're giving. And so if I come to a company that they're struggling with Debian packages, or maybe there's a Debian maintainer, you go to the Deb conference, and you say, hey, look, I work on the Nix stuff, and I have this talk about a universal packaging layer. Been spending a lot of time in this space. And the work that you do in Debian is similar to the work they do in Fedora, similar to the work they do in Gentoo, similar to the work they do in all of these areas. And look, I'm not saying Nix has to be the one, but I think there is a world where there is a universal, agreed upon place where we put all of our efforts. And it looks like this. And if you really want to be inspiring about it, you can use the Debian toolchain to probably create that initial lake and add features that are missing from the Debian. So now you show people the delta. If Debian had this, you would solve these kind of problems. If you had this, you can solve the SBOM problem. If you had this, you can install 2 Debian packages at the same time on a singular system, and they wouldn't conflict with each other if you only had this. And then people will see that small bit of delta and be like, oh, that makes a lot of sense. And then you say, I'm going to show you something. I'm not going to name it yet, but it has those things. And then they can decide, does Debian move closer to what Nix is doing? Or do you get a few people inspired enough to say, what if Debian were to pull from Nix packages to create the distribution? That's that inspirational, that's that doing the work, and it doesn't have to be crushing. Now, if you're successful and it actually works, there may be a world where the Debian package ecosystem is layered on top of Nix. That's progress based on inspiration. You don't need to go and talk bad about the community. You don't need to say the Debian people are dumb, they're wasting time. That's the attack mode. There's another way of doing it that can actually yield a similar result. So that's the way I think about it. But it's on you to prove, but also you got to humble yourself. There might be things you can learn from those other packaging communities about how they make things simpler, right? I think the reason why Flox exists for a lot of people is because I remember trying Nix for the first time. It was like, what do you know about quantum theory? I was like, I'm just trying to get a new version of Postgres, man. I didn't want to venture through a wormhole to get it. So I think you've got to just make sure that we're all being humble here. Where can we learn? And just have that shared vision, because Nix is one path. There might be others.
Yeah, and I'll say a few things. So obviously, I wear two hats all the time, right? I wear the NixOS Foundation hat, and I'm talking to very big and very small companies. And I think with my role, because recently in the last year or so, I think we had a lot of progress on governance. And I've pretty much converted my role, instead of just like doing everything, to just focusing a lot on really getting the partnerships in and getting Nix more integrated into these frontier leading ecosystems so that it becomes more of a standard, right? Because I think there's a flywheel. And I think HashiCorp actually talked about this flywheel at some point back in the good old days. And the flywheel is industry standardization. You want to get the folks that are showing the world how things are done, because that's how it works, right? There's always the 1% that everyone's looking up to. I think, Kelsey, you're part of that. And they're like, okay, if they thought about it, like they probably thought about it enough, and I can probably just try it. And then you want to get team proliferation. Like you want to get the real teams hands-on, right? You want to get like the boots on the ground experience. And then you want to kind of circle it back so that Nix becomes more and more part of the general critical infrastructure. What if I told you that AWS was funding the S3 cache? Doesn't that make you feel a little bit safer? Like someone at AWS, probably a really smart person, it's like, yeah, we need to fund that because it matters because of reasons, right? But to get a little bit more tactical, right? So I'm also on the Flox side, we're working with folks who are, for the first time, stepping into the paradigms of Nix. And just to sneak behind the curtain, what I've seen in the last few months, maybe it's helpful, on both instances, is one, there's, in the larger organizations, and even in the small ones, there's still a lot of that enchanted, haunted forest around Nix. Like, all of us know that there is now, like if you go back to the 2022 NixCon, where we were 120 people in the basement of a Parisian university, and it had no windows, had one bathroom. There's, I feel like we all went through boot camp together there. There was maybe half a path that you needed a machete to get into the Holy Grail in the middle of the Enchanted Forest. And all of us here usually now know that there's like 8, right? There's different products that can help you get into it. There's different flows. Nix documentation has evolved. Nix itself has evolved. Like there's a lot of things happening, but there's still a lot of that feeling, especially with folks who have a tie-in into the technologies that they understand, right? So we have executives. We have folks who grew up on containers. They grew up on the previous paradigm that they're used to. So especially in the larger orgs, I do feel a lot of times that there's like a subset of folks who are like, let's not relearn something because this kind of already works. To your point, Fareed, right? And I think we need to have empathy there. And the way that I've been able to kind of like draw the path or chart a course that has seemed to resonate the most in, I would say, the last 3 months, has been two things. I think number one is the fact that this doesn't break anything, right? It doesn't. You don't believe me? Let me show you, right? It doesn't. I can take the same machine, and I can have my Nix set up, and I can have whatever bash script, Docker amalgamate of a Frankenstein monster we have running, and it just works side by side, right? So A, you're not breaking anything. I'm not forcing you down a one-way door. And I found that to be very powerful, especially when you talk about the second thing, which is kind of finding the black swans of what the decision makers or the folks in the room really care about. And today what I've seen in the second area is, again, 2 things. One is security, because I think that's top of mind for a lot of people, and I think Nix is positioned incredibly well in anything that has to do with the questions around software supply chain. And 2 is agents, right? I think Nix, again, is uniquely positioned to help control, guardrail, and provide more of a solid base for whatever work we're doing with agents. So I think, obviously, those are mine, but I think from my perspective, I found don't worry, this is a 2-sided door, you can walk back from it, no one's gonna get hurt, and finding those black swans that the people care about around you have been more successful, but
there's a human element to your question that I didn't answer. Kubernetes celebrated its 10th birthday a couple years ago, and they had this nice celebration in the Google headquarters. I'm retired by this time, but I come back to MC this event. And Solomon Hykes is there, the founder of Docker. And I can tell he was reluctant to be there. This is Kubernetes' 10th birthday event. And if you know the history of how this container thing happened, Docker is, to me, is very credited with getting a lot of people on board this container train, like a lot. LXC existed before it, Linux C groups on the fringes, but the thing we call containers today, that's Docker. And Docker was leading the entire industry, including the hyperscalers and the incumbents. They were full steam ahead, and you had to make a decision. Do you get on the Docker train, or do you wait? And in many ways, it felt like Docker was just, you know, making this path that even the biggest companies were just trying to attach to. And then Kubernetes comes out. And then Kubernetes is like, hey, Docker is cool, but it's missing a lot. And we put Docker below Kubernetes to the point where it disappears. For most Kubernetes installs, I bet you Docker's not even installed. Container D, run C, it's been blown up. And most people, if you looked at KubeCon is still 10, 15,000 people. There's no more Docker cons, really. And that 10th year anniversary, we're sitting on that stage, and I can see the hesitation. I was like, Solomon, I just want you to know, it's your birthday too, because there is no Kubernetes without Docker. It doesn't happen, it's not on the radar. And I had to remind him is that there's that phrase, and I use it a lot, some people have ideas and some ideas have people. Docker became so successful that it went from Solomon's idea and Docker Inc.'s idea to just the industry's idea. And once it belongs to the entire industry, collectively they decide where it goes next. And it happened to be Kubernetes. And so in many ways, there are people in the Kubernetes community that felt like they came and blew up that entire trajectory that they deserve to probably have a bigger part in than they have today. And so I can understand there's this human element of people who create things and trying to create better things without necessarily stepping on the toes of the people who've given you your foundation on which to grow on. And so I think that real human element is there, but the fact that you're even asking the question, that's the important part. That's the empathy piece, where you listen and you say, hey, I don't want to step on your toes. How can I present this in a way that it inspires and doesn't attack?
And I think, and I know we're short on time, Kelsey and I are going to be around for the next few days, but I think this also, I think Fareed's point kind of leads us into almost an ask, right? And it's an ask that I'm very excited that I have really good industry partners inside of the Nix ecosystem that are really bolstering and partnering up with us, the foundation, to do this. But you know, if you're using Nix out there, if you're a company, if you're part of a company, telling that story, sharing it, being willing to partner up with us, the foundation, the various things like support contributors, fund contributors, and be public about it is what helps folks like that then come to work and be like, hey guys, you know, it's not just us, it's not just me, the crazy Nix person, telling you that you should do it. Look at all of these folks, right? They're mega successful, they're billion-dollar firms, they're scaling and they're in the news all the time, but underneath they're using Nix. So I think it's almost an ask back to the ecosystem. Like if you're out there, talk about it, right? Celebrate it, and that just helps us kind of spin that flywheel around. So before we finish, obviously super excited and happy to have you here with us and you taking the time, bringing the family down. I did hear from like a little bird in blue skies that, I don't know if this is true, but would this be the last year you're doing conferences?
This is the last time I'm ever doing a presentation, so I've evolved. I have no interest in standing at a podium presenting technologies because that's just not me anymore. I have to lean into that. I don't want to show you how to use Cloud Code. Don't want to show you how to use Kubernetes. I'm 45 years old. I'm ready to move on, and to me, technology has taken a different life form for me. It is just a means to an end, but the end now is becoming more important to me than any individual path. So no, I am not excited to put together another live demo. If you want the old Kelsey, go watch the old videos. The evolved person is way more in tune to what we need to do going forward as a whole, big picture. So the people that have been raising their hands doing Nix for 10 plus years, that experience you have, the thing that made you excited to be committed for 10 years, you gotta figure out, you don't have to do anything. There's a benefit to you figuring out how to recapture what made you excited 10 years ago and try to inspire the next generation. It is not a marathon, it's a relay race. And the best time to pass a baton is when you're running full steam versus super tired and injured where it doesn't do anyone any good. So to me, that would be my call to action, is that there is so much more to this game than whether Nix is successful or not. I do think Nix has a role to play, but no one's going to ever know that unless you find a way to tell the story. Thanks for having me.
Thank you. And we have speaker gifts. They're really good, local, artisanal, chocolate. I don't know if AI was involved in that. But I did want to get you something personal from me and Flox, because it does sound like I'm pumped that we're one of the last conferences that Kelsey's like golden year is going to finish off with. But hopefully in retirement you might have some more time. I did not wrap this. My wife did. We got you two. I know you don't like taking stuff, but it's two Magic the Gathering Commander decks.
Can I tell you a story about Magic the Gathering really quick? I know we're close out of time. But Mike, you were there. When I joined Puppet Labs, I moved from Atlanta, Georgia to Portland, Oregon. And I realized people trade duck eggs for tomatoes. Weird, but it's a thing. And I remember they started this thing called like a draft. It was the first time I've ever played Magic. I was too cool for school in middle school, never learned. But at Puppet Labs, I was like, all right, I'm going to learn how to play Magic the Gathering. And so we did the draft. I got my cards. I remember it was like a white weenie deck. And I remember I'm just beating people, and I end up in the finals. And so I'm like, you don't even know how to play. And you're in the finals. And then I became like a card shark. I would go to the comic book stores and be like, hey, how do you play? Can I play? And I remember someone was like, hey, I'm not going to let you play until you put those cards in the sleeve. I'm like, okay, I'll put them there. And so
sleeves.
This is,
We
got
got
sleeves. And so I've been playing Magic the Gathering Arena really ever since, or Magic Online ever since. So this is definitely something that I don't talk about a lot, but I am like hidden Magic card shark somewhere.
He also.
That's me.
How many people play Magic the Gathering? Okay, you don't want to play Kelsey. He has the most horrendous deck to play against, but you kind of do. So, anyways, maybe you can get your daughter back into it. There's two decks. It's pre-made decks. There's a box to put them in, sleeves to put them in.
Thank you.
And thank you for everything that you've done for the community and the ecosystem. Man.